Hi, friends. This is Ashley Lateki Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary. And today we'll be looking at the heart. And the heart has been on my mind a lot and in my conversations with friends and family and students. So today we'll be exploring the world of the heart and we'll examine the language of the heart, how the heart speaks, the woundings of the heart, and also herbs that can help repair and can help us tap into the medicine of the heart. So let's first start by talking about the heart as an organ and the heart on its own. So we often think about the heart as this muscle that lives in the chest that just pumps blood and that's just its job. And often we can go a whole day or a week without even thinking about the heart because it is sort of beyond our control. We can't regulate our heart rate or blood flow unless you're an advanced yogi. then then you may have that capacity, but for most of us it's just something that we take for granted. We just know that the heart's doing its job, so we sort of let it do its thing. Um, but I think that if we were to spend a little more time considering the heart and a lot of the different teachings it has and the way that it actually works, it would be a very helpful thing to reflect upon. So that's part of the reason why I really wanted to talk about this subject. So, in a very kind of basic sense, one way we can think about the heart is that the heart pumps, and it helps regulate the dance between unused and vital force fluids in the body, and then used up or sort of fluids that they've seen their day. They've had their time in the spotlight, and now it's time for them to be recycled and then reoxygenated. So if we think about this flow between sort of used and unused material, and that the heart really, it's constantly flowing through the old and the new. And so when we think about it in this way, the heart is an incredible distinguisher of what is useful and what is not useful, and where the unuseful things need to go, and where the usable and the vital forces need to go. So that's kind of looking at it in a little bit of an anatomical and energetic way. But one of the lenses that I think is a really beautiful way to view the heart is the lens of traditional Chinese medicine. And the traditional Chinese medicine system has such a poetic way of describing the organs. And so when they speak about the heart, and they speak about the responsibility of the heart and really the responsibility of all the different organs. But the heart's responsibility is to be a house for Shen. And Shen is a term that's a little bit hard to describe in English. It's the way that I understand it is it's the intelligent processing force of the heart mind. And so while, we can think about the head and the brain as processing facts and figures and making rational decisions, the heart has an intelligence of its own. And there's a whole institute called the Heart Math Institute, if you're interested in learning more about the heart and its incredible features from a more biomechanical level and emotional level. The Heart Math Institute, I think it's heartmathinstitute.org. You can read up on that. But the intelligence of the heart is something that is part of the Shen, and the Shen is also the sparkle in the eyes. And so we can see the quality of a person's Shen by the amount of life force that's in their eyes. And so babies and puppies, they have this incredible sparkle, and we've all seen people that don't have that. You're like, where are you? And so the Shen can be depleted and it can be damaged. The Shen also supervises incoming information and processes it in a way that makes it wholly useful. And not just useful for what are my needs in the here and now, like food and resources, but it processes information in terms of its holistic capacity to be of benefit, not only for ourselves, but to be of benefit for all. And the heart also, the Shen energy of the heart also processes our reactions and the outgoing information. So it processes, it sort of takes in all the phenomenology, all of the information that's coming through the senses, processes it, and allows us to have a very regulated response rather than a quick and sometimes abrupt reaction. So there's a smoothness that we find with Shen of 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 information, processing things inwardly, moving them out. Shen also regulates emotions. So it also creates that smooth exchange of emotional responses, which are healthy. We are supposed to be sad in moments and excited in moments and rageful in moments. So all of these, the broad range of emotions are also regulated by the heart. It is also a decoder. And so if we think about, the mind as sort of, in some ways, the mind takes information and can make a split decision in terms of, what is the the reaction that might keep us safe or keep things in status quo. The heart energy is more kind of like, I kind of like the old grandmother kind of an archetype, where it just sort of like sits back and lets everything come in and then processes it in a way, and kind of decodes everything that's coming in a way that allows her, to respond with both intelligence, but also with compassion and, with feeling. The heart is not devoid of feeling, whereas the mind is not. That's a very different energetic. It's a very different way of responding. Another thing that the heart helps to govern is, planning, and not planning as in like, okay, I need to get here, and so what needs to happen to get there, but more in the terms of the soul's journey. So when we think about like our life's trajectory and where are we going as a spirit soul, the heart is the one that guides us along that path to help us find that, joyful and, uh, satisfying outcome. So as we're making really big decisions in our lives, the heart should really be called upon for counsel more than just making the list of the pros and cons. How do each of these feel? How does There's this great exercise that I learned when I was studying Kundalini yoga maybe 20 years ago, which was this exercise, that Guru Ratana, who is a student of Yogi Bhajan's, she taught us. And it was to, when you have a big choice, imagine both options, one in each hand. So you could say, should I do this over here? And we can call this A, or should I do this over here and call it B? And so you imagine them just sort of as energy sitting in the palms of your hands. And then you sort of rise up above the crown of the head, and with your eyes closed, from that space above your mind. So she would call it the higher self. So from the seat of the higher self who's looking down, start to feel the energy in your hands and start to see which hand starts to get more energy. So from the perspective of the higher mind, where does the energy go? And so I've used this so many times. And so one hand will start to get heavier and fuller and warmer. And it's not my brain. I'm not rationally putting energy there or putting my mind there. It's detaching from that linear mind. And then you'll feel where the life force is. And so, that is a very Shen kind of activity, is to feel through your decision making process. Another interesting thing about the heart is that the root of the heart in Chinese medicine is the tongue. So, it is also governed, the heart also governs our sense of taste, and it governs our speech, and it governs our ability to speak clearly, to speak with an emotional component, and it also governs, the inability to speak. And so I'm sure we've all had moments where you're beyond words. It's like the feeling of something is so big and so present that the words might not come. And, in time, when you tap into the heart will help give you the words to speak. And so it's really interesting. My friend Matthew Wood, he stopped by this past weekend, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about language and the power of language, and how language can either kind of dissociate and kind of rip us and strip us from the heart, or it can be the way that the heart um, can move itself into the outside world and can engage us in conversations that are of real substance and of real meaning. And when we were talking about language and the heart, which I'll discuss in a little bit more context, what it also brought us back to was talking about COVID and how COVID attacks the heart. That's one of the primary ways that it enters the body is through these angiotensin receptors. And these angiotensin receptors regulate the heart rate. And they're found throughout the body, not just in the heart. But COVID has, a lot of people experience heart palpitations, tightening of the chest. And the other thing that COVID does is that it takes away your sense of taste. And again, in traditional Chinese medicine, taste is one of the languages. It's connected to the heart energy. So COVID seems to really be doing something on the heart. And we could think of it both in a negative and in a positive. But if we think about it, again, from a more holistic viewpoint, that in some way this virus is altering and changing our hearts. And I think Matt, we agreed that our hope is that this is a positive change, a positive reconstruction in some way. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that there has been more outbursts and more hateful language, and the news is just filled, and there's such divisive talk in our country, in the United States, and across the world right now, but particularly here in the United States. And how much of this linked to the weakening of the Shen, the weakening of our heart, our disconnection from our heart space to be able to speak to one another with love and with understanding. And I think it's something that it's a very timely conversation and topic to be considering. um, Matthew was describing kind of how in indigenous languages, they don't use this very Western way of formulating thoughts, which is if dot 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 then, which really is a very constructive way of using language, and it's quite arrogant. It's this, I know that this equals this. But in more indigenous languages, they the way that they would use their words was to describe phenomena and to try to use story and sensory information to offer possibilities of what could be. And then it was really up to the individual to translate that speak and make meaning of it for themselves. And in many ways, this indigenous type of language is very self-empowering because um, it helps you to form a trust in your own ability to decode things rather than taking facts spoken from someone else's lips and then holding those as true. And there is a quote by Bob Schmidt, who is a very well-known historian and astrologer who is a friend of both, was a friend of both Matthew Wood and my husband, who said, really this language, we could think of phenomena as letting the phenomena speak for itself. And so I think this is part of what the heart medicine can help us do is letting the phenomena speak for itself rather than trying to box it and cage it, take away its wings, and rather to give yourself the time and space to decode everything that's coming in and making sense of it for yourself. So we know that speech, really that thought precedes speech. And so, what would happen if we really took time to soak information in from multiple sources and then let the heart uh, decode and come up with its own speech and then allow that to flow from our mouth? How would that change the dialogue that is going on in the world right now? So I want us to think about that. Also, when we think about the heart and we think about this idea of wounding, um, there are so many ways that we have been wounded, and we all carry wounds. It's not something that only some people get in this material existence. And so our woundings can come from tragedies, it can come from childhood traumas, they can come from um, all sorts of experiences that take away our own innate trust of ourselves and our ability to process and analyze and speak. And in as a longtime yoga student, the word anahata, which is the word that translates as the heart center, the direct translation of anahata is the unstruck. And so we can think about, in Sanskrit, this idea of the unstruck is that the heart can never be hurt, it can never be broken, it can never be damaged. And even though so many of us have experienced the agony of loss and tragedy and heartbreak, the Ayurvedic view and the Indian view of this was that even though those things impact the heart and they feel like they'll never go away, that the heart is youthful and it's forever. Pure. And in time, the heart will restore itself. And that ability um, to feel the compassion, love, and the emotions that are associated with more positive feelings will come back. And so I think that's an important piece to add in here too, is this unstraightable nature of the heart, and how it's welcome. It welcomes us all back. The heart doesn't close its gates. It is constantly opening and closing. Boom, 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 until the moment we take our last breath, and then it goes boom. And the wings cover the heart and it falls asleep until it finds another body. So, I think if we remember that the gate of the heart, there's always an opportunity for it to open back to us, that can be a very healing and helpful image. So let's talk a little bit about two plants that I wanted to talk about in relationship to the heart. So the first one is rose, and there's a lot of different rose species out there. So I think a lot of those could be used. I'll mention a few specifically, but I think for most rose plants, Rosa SPP, as you'll see it listed, could be used for this medicine. So one thing about rose is that the moment it hits us, it changes us. And so the smell of a rose, we stop, that phrase, stop and smell the roses. And that's one of my spiritual practices, is when I walk by in DC, there were just so many roses in people's yards. And so it became a practice of mine to stop and smell the roses. And it's interesting that one of the compounds found in rose oil is it connects with a very specific receptor in the brain. And in honeybees' brains, it's a pheromone. So it excites cordial thinking. Cordial also means of the heart. So it sort of it moves us into a place of feeling in our psyche and in our body. And whenever we taste rose, if you've been lucky enough to taste rose water or eat rose flavored candies, there's also something that causes us to pause. So I think that's a gift of rose in itself, is this, and you don't go and reach in and pluck, you can't just pull a handful of roses. There's thorns in there. So you have to slow down as you go in. And so the medicine of rose just starts in its wholeness, in its own ability to help us slow down, feel, take a deep breath. And that is good medicine in itself. The medicine is also very gentle but strong, right? It has these very vulnerable little flower and these very, very soft little petals. But yet it's also strong at the same time, with this very thick stem and these very intense thorns. It is an old remedy. And so I always think of these plants that have evolved along with us as being very sacred medicines that we can, that our physiology is just so comfortable with. It's a medicine that we just know deep in our bones. And so, most of us can use this medicine. It's also very safe. There's really no known contraindications for working with rose as a medicine. Um, it is astringent, and I think of the astringency of rose as sort of holding us, sort of like a parent embracing us. And so, if you have deep childhood wounds and your parents weren't there for you, the embrace of rose and those tannins and that little bit of astringency can help you to feel protected and safe while it works more deeply on the heart and on the internal organs. And it has this gentle alterative and sort of gently cleansing effect in the body. It's a slight diuretic, so it moves things out to the kidneys. It also breaks down stagnation of blood and blood clots. Um, it is a decongestant on the sinuses. It's a decongestant on the womb. So if you've had any difficulties with pregnancies or miscarriages, I used it in a number of formulas for clients who've had miscarriages, adding just some roses into their tea along with other herbs to help gently move the blood and just help to cleanse, but also heal the womb and move any of residual energies that need to be released. The rose medicine does that really, really nicely. It's also a flower of that can help build self-confidence. And so, using rose medicine can not only help that, and again, at the very beginning, I talked about the heart and how it sort of brings it circulates new and old. And so, it can bring out sort of uh, the old self talk about we're not good enough or um, not being able to trust your own intuition or trust your own inner knowing, which for a lot of people that lived in or that grew up in very difficult childhood situations and home, one thing that can get very damaged is our ability to trust ourselves and to know um, our own value and to know our own thoughts and to trust our own thoughts and our own judgments. And so Rose just like, okay, let's move that out. Let's bring confidence and protection back in. Another interesting thing is that rose is a cardiotonic. And there was a study that I found, I forget what year it was, maybe 2016, where they found that the flavonoids in rose damascus, that's Damascus, which is a very beautiful aromatic variety of rose, that the flavonoids in this particular rose suppressed angiotensin 1 converting enzyme. And so, angiotensin 1 converting enzyme converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, which regulates and actually increases blood pressure. And so they found that rose actually inhibits that enzyme that converts these two angiotensins. And so thus it will reduce blood pressure. And so that's, for many of us that are under a lot of stress, maybe we already have cardiac issues, rose can be a very gentle way to just gently lower blood pressure. And pressure in general can be very, very nice. It's also an inotropic. And an inotropic herb is something that modifies the force and speed of the contraction of muscles. And so again, I was thinking about this in terms of just a more energetic medicine, and that it modifies the speed and force of the muscle of the heart. And so imagine again if we can slow down and create more space, and that might again affect the way we think and the way that we speak and the way that we take information in and the way that we're able to let things go. So the last thing I'll say about rose before we talk about how to use it is that it is a very gentle nervine. And so, for people that are experiencing high amounts of anxiety and tension and stress and difficulty sleeping, rose can be a very, very nice, gentle relaxant to just sort of help the nervous system take itself down a notch or two. So, how do we use rose? There's a lot of ways. And so, I want us to think outside the box a little bit here. One way that we can use rose is just simply as a ally in our home. And so I often recommend this for my clients when I come up with, like when a plant starts talking to me and says, this is I'm the plant spirit for this person. I'll often tell them to take a photo or a picture of the plant, or if they have access to it, like a rose, to get themselves like a half dozen or a dozen of roses and put them in their home. Put one in the bathroom, one in the bedroom, a few in the kitchen, and just sort of bring that energy and infuse it in the home space. And specifically with rose, because it's so easy to find, and it has such a great fragrance, hopefully you'll find one with good fragrance, that's been unfortunately kind of genetically modified out for whatever reason, um, that you can have that energy and that essence of rose filling your space. Another way to use it is to make what I would recommend, you can do an infusion, but I would recommend either a cold or a hot infusion. And let's talk about the difference. So you can use about 1 teaspoon for 1 cup of hot water to make a hot infusion. And I'm talking here about the rose petals. And rose petals are easy to find in commerce, although you really want to make sure you're using organic rose petals because they are often very highly treated with pesticides. So, organic rose petals, 1 teaspoon per 1 cup of hot water. Let it steep for maybe 5-10 minutes. The color will come out nice and brightly. And this is really good, especially if you're trying to dry up and astringe tissues. So, if you tend to be a really kind of damp, heavy, maybe sadness is part of your symptom picture, then that really kind of astringent, pick me up, squeeze me in, hold me tight energy of the tannins will be present with the hot water extraction. If you already run a little bit dry and really you want the more gentle, softening, aromatic qualities of rose, then do 2 teaspoons of rose petals with 1 cup of cold water and let that steep overnight. And the cold water infusion won't take out a lot of those tannins. So you won't get that astringent taste, and it will preserve those very delicate, beautiful, volatile oils. And it'll feel like you're sipping rose water, which you could find organic rose water and sip that too. But this is sort of a way of making it on your own. It's a lot less expensive as well. You can also use rose as a hydrosol. A hydrosol is what's left over after the process of distilling and making essential oils. It's often very easy to find at health food stores and even at international grocery stores. And so you can use a hydrosol or rose water as a facial spray. It's very toning for the skin. It creates a more a youthful, glowing appearance. I really like to use rose hip seed oil. That's what I use on my skin every night and every morning after washing my face. So that's a really nice way of using rose, and you definitely get that smell along with it. And another way of using it is just as a room spray. So you can use the hydrosol or you can even buy the essential oil, which is very expensive, and make your own spray. It works really well with sandalwood. Rose and sandalwood work really nicely together. So you could use those 2 essential oils and use those as a room spray or as a perfume for your body. If you use it on your body, do dilute it in a carrier oil. So that's the first plant, that's rose. And one other plant that I wanted to talk about is daisy. And daisy is a plant that we don't often talk about much in Western herbal medicine, but I just love daisies. And I think, some of us just, when we see daisies, we just light up. And I know my sister-in-law, or I call her my sister in love because we were brought together through love, not law. My sister-in-law, she loves daisies, and her middle name is Joy. And I whenever I think about daisies now, I think about Heidi Joy because she has this joyful disposition, and she loves daisies. And so the Latin name for daisies are Bellis perennius. It's Bellis. And then second word is Pernennis. And I first learned about using daisies as a medicine from the Seed Sisters. And these are a group of women based out of the UK, and they were featured on a podcast that I love to listen to called Eat Weeds podcast. So if you're looking for a great herbal podcast, check out Eat Weeds. I think it's eatweeds.uk, but you can look it up on Apple iTunes as well. But the Seed Sisters did a talk several years ago and about using, I think it was on different medicinal flowers, and they talked about daisies, and I was like, Oh, they're using it as medicine. And they told this story how they were out in the field, this just huge field of daisies, and they were picking them and they were getting giddy and excited, and their hearts were just like blowing out of their chest. But it became this sort of obsessive compulsive thing sort of took over them, and they couldn't stop picking, and they needed to leave, and it was starting to get dark and they had to go, but they couldn't stop picking. It was like addictive. And then they talked later about how when they brought all of these daisies home and made medicines and they started playing with the medicine, that they found that it was really, really good. It was like sort of an antidote to obsessive compulsive thinking and obsessive compulsive behavior. It actually provided a medicine for that. And so I was thinking about, the heart, and, a lot of us these days, the heart has been quite depressed for very good reasons. There's a lot going on in the world. Daisies is such a joyful energy and such a joyful medicine. But also, I think one thing that I know for me, I have to be careful about is getting into this obsessive thinking about what is the outcome of this? What will happen with that? Am I going to get COVID? Just like all of these sort of thoughts that can kind of take over our minds and that block us from the heart. And so Daisy, I think, would be a really good medicine for right now to just sort of unravel that sort of obsessive thinking about all of these uncontrollable things, and instead bring us back to what's at the middle of the daisy, which is this bright yellow heart. Now, let's talk a little bit about the medicine of daisy from other perspectives. It's Culpeper saw that it was ruled by Venus. Culpeper was a very famous medical astrologer, and so he talked about it being under the rulership of Venus, which is um, the ruler of love and beauty. He talked about it specifically as it being a really good medicine to dissolve congealed blood. And so we can see that, the mentioning of blood and this sort of hardening or congealing of blood will affect the heart. And so if we think about kind of dirty, old, stagnant blood, how does that affect this dance of new and old? So if we can use daisy medicine to break up congealed blood, it was also used as a wound remedy. And so we can think about it being used as a vulnerary or wound remedy. It was used for lacerations and cuts topically, but also internal wounds and ulcers and ulcerations. So this inner and outer wound healing capacity of this amazing flower would also be something that we could consider using right now. Um, it was also used by the Romans to help break up congealed blood in wounds, so wounds that became stagnant. And again, we can think about this in energetic terms, like, are there wounds that have become old and stagnant that are blocking us in some way? How do we dissolve and break that down? And, we know that daisies, they survive these knocks of life and they just bounce back up and they just come back every year happier and happier. And could we be so lucky to, to embody that energy too? So the ways that you can use daisy, again, would be bringing daisies into your home, having a picture of a daisy maybe on your desk. One of my clients recently commissioned a friend of hers who's an artist to paint her a picture of one of the medicinal plants I asked her to put on her altar and on her workspace. So if you have an artist friend, you could also, do a commissioned work or find a nice local artist on Etsy to create an image of Daisy for you. But the homeopathic, so besides that, another way to use it is homeopathically. That's another way, easy way to find it, because it's really hard to find daisy medicine in commerce unless you pick it and dry it and use it yourself. But the homeopathic, you could look it up, Bellis perennis, as I spelled before, Bellis perennis. It's used homeopathically for bumps, bruises, swellings. It's also used for shock. And really interestingly, it's also used for when there's been a shock or a trauma or an injury, and then new symptoms start showing up after that. And I don't know how many times I've seen this happen with clients where they've had a really traumatic life event, and then all these new health issues start coming as a result of that shock. And so it's used for acne, engorgement, or again, holding on to stuff. stuff, blood engorgement. So and even acne is sort of holding on, engorgement, holding on to stuff. So we can think of using the homeopathic after a shock or injury to just clear stuff out. The flower essence can also be used. This would be a great option for children and for adults alike. And you can use the daisy flower essence to promote clarity of mind. And I really liked this. I was reading about it in one of my favorite books, Flower Power. I don't know if you can see this, by Anne McIntyre. This is a really, really great, wonderful guide to working with flower medicines. So Anne McIntyre comments on its flower essence use of being able, the daisy helps us be able to organize ourselves in relation to information. So I thought that was really interesting. And that's so much the Shen, isn't it? It's like you have all this information coming in, but how do you organize yourself within it and respond from within an organized arrangement of what you've assimilated. And so I think it would work really, really nicely for building up that heart Shen. And I don't know for you, but for me, when I just look at a daisy, maybe we should just look at one. I'll open up a picture in my book. But there's something even just about looking at a daisy that just makes my heart light get really, really bright and really, really shiny. So here's a picture of the daisy. Look at that. I mean, come on. That is a happy plant. So, we can utilize its medicine in so many ways, even just by looking at it. So that's all I have for today. So I hope this gives you some ideas. Maybe it opens up the wings of your imagination, maybe opening the wings of your heart, and gives you some actions to take. And so let your heart guide you to one of these plants, or maybe there's another herb that, boy, that really came up for you during my talk today that you thought, oh boy, I really need to bring this plant back into my life. So listen to that, really start to listen to your heart and trust that guidance. And I know Matthew is going to be offering a talk on language and looking at the way that we speak and how we understand things like cultural appropriation and how we understand things like just a lot of the conflict and how we can use the indigenous way of thinking to help us. So if you look at Matthew Wood, if you go to Matthew Wood Herb Institute or Matthew Wood Institute of Herbs. You'll have to Google it. And you look on his website, that talk should be coming up in the next few days. If you're listening to this, in the future, then it might already be recorded and available for you. But I know I'm going to be tuning in to listen to him speak more on that subject. So thanks all for listening. Please comment, let me know what you thought of today's talk and if it was helpful and any other things that you might want to add in. So take care, everyone. Be good to your heart, and I'll see you all again soon.